My name is Allison Ragon. I'm the Assistant Dean of Students and Director of First Year Experience here at Lehigh. So when students come home for the first time from college, it can be a big adjustment for families. So some things I think families should keep in mind. Setting the expectations for students is really helpful. They have been on their own and living a very free life for the last few weeks, and so coming home to rules and obligations is not something they're prepared to do. So it would help families greatly to set some expectations. How often do they want to see their student? What are the expectations with spending time with family versus spending time with friends? Is there a curfew? Are there meals that your student's going to be anticipating that they're going to have while they're home? So just kind of setting some guidelines as to what the experience would be like will help make it a good experience for both parties. I think having the conversation with students is really as basic as just starting to talk about it. Ask them, what do you think it's going to be like when you come home for the first time? Having the student kind of talk through what they intend to do over their time at home. How often do they think they're going to spend time with friends, significant others, with family? So it doesn't have to be anything stressful for the families to talk about. Just start the dialogue and start asking your student what they think their time home will look like. I think when students are home, it's a great idea to start talking about how the academic transition has been coming along. Are they going to class? For families to start asking, are the students excelling in the way that they thought they would excel in the classroom, outside of the classroom? So revisiting the expectations academically is a great time. It's a great time to do that when students are home for the first time. I think when they come home, it's also really good for them to start talking through their social experiences. Are they making the friends that they were hoping to make? Are they getting involved? Do they just spend their time in the classroom? Or are they balancing that with some extracurricular activities that help broaden their experience when they're in college? So those are two things that I think families should talk about. Coming home for the first time, it's also really great for students to start talking through the financial piece of their education. Hopefully families and students talked about this before they went to college, who was paying for what. And if they didn't talk about it, they should definitely start that conversation when the students are home for the first time. How much money has the student been spending? Where is that money coming from? Is the student responsible for any of their costs, or are the families contributing? So if your student comes home and shares information that is completely blowing you away and you were not expecting to hear whatever they're sharing, I think first and foremost, as much as a parent or a family member can just listen and not react, which is really difficult at times, we understand that, but as much as they can just listen and let the student share. It probably took a lot of nerve for the student to share whatever they're sharing. They probably had to really spend some time thinking through how to share the information with family. So it will comfort them if you just listen and don't react right away. And then take some time to ask some processing questions. Why did you make that decision? Or what is it that caused you to decide to do X, Y, or Z thing? That can help the conversation. If families aren't careful, they'll shut the conversation down with their reaction, and that will mean that students probably won't share much more about their college experience with the family members. So don't react, just kind of listen, hear what your student has to say, and then ask some processing questions that will help the student figure out, did they make the right decision? And it'll just help the families all around. I think when students come home, as much as they can show that they are becoming adults by starting to lead some of these conversations with their families. So if the student can walk in the door and say, hey, I recognize that it might be a little challenging for all of us now that I'm back from college. Here's what I'm thinking my time home will look like. And so for the student to take ownership over the conversation will really show the families that the student is growing and learning, and it will provide some comfort for families that their student is actually getting a lot from their college experience. I think it's also really helpful for students to talk through and be really upfront about any challenges that they've had while they've been away, and any goals that they have. So if a student is hoping to study abroad or hoping to stay at the institution over the summer and take summer courses, if they want to have an internship over the summer, as much as the student can start to bring that up, it won't be a shock to the family if all of a sudden in May the student doesn't plan to come home for the summer. So starting some of those conversations early from the student side of things is really helpful for families. Communication is something that families really need to talk through before their student goes away to school. And it's not something that families often think about, but it will help everybody's experience if they do spend a little bit of time talking through what's it going to look like when my student goes off to school? How often are we going to communicate? What methods are we going to use to communicate? With Facebook and Twitter and texting and email, there's a lot of opportunities to keep in touch with your student. You may not want to use all of those, and your student may not want you to use all of those methods. So determining what kind of communication method and how frequently. If a family member thinks they're going to call their student every day on their way to work and the student plans on sleeping in, there could be a rub there, and the families and students, it's helpful if they can decide what the time frame is going to be. It also helps if the student holds up their end of the bargain. So if a family says they want to talk every night and the student agrees, and then the student doesn't answer their phone, families get very nervous, rightfully so, and then they start calling other people at the institution. So whatever agreement is made, the student and family need to keep that agreement or revisit and readjust as necessary. We often have families that will call and want to solve the problem for their student, and that is not helping anybody. So when the student is the one that has to make the decision, seek out the resources, and solve their own problem, that's a learning experience for the student. And sometimes those learning experiences, we overlook how powerful those can be when the student solves their own problem. So when families call my office and are trying to help solve academic advising issues or solve an issue that a student's having with their roommate, that's not really helping at all. So instead, if families would encourage their student to seek out the institution's resources, if the student calls my office, it is so much easier for me to have a conversation and guide them on the next steps and how they can solve it. That helps their learning quite a bit. When they call home, home is comfortable, and so home is where they will vent and share all the worst of what is happening at college. They'll share that their roommate is the worst, they hate their professors, they're doing horrible in a class, and sometimes it's not as bad as they make it out to be, but they vent to home. And so oftentimes we have to remind families that when your student calls and they are really upset, listen, let them get it off their chest, and know that it's probably not as bad as they're making it out, but they're going to share all that bad news with you. They'll probably hang up the phone and be just fine and walk away and everything's great, and then you're stuck with that burden of all this information that they just shared. So give the student time, touch base with them after they call and share a lot of information if they're upset, if they're homesick, if they're crying. Let them get that off their chest, maybe give them a day or so and touch base with them again and ask, last time you were kind of upset. Are things better? Have you done anything differently since the last time we talked? Don't call the institution and try and solve the problem for them, whatever it is that they're venting about. Just know they're going to be upset sometimes, and they're going to share a lot of that with you, but it might not be as bad as they make it out to be.